declaration of war. On the left, Tom Brayton. On the right, Pat Buchanan. In the Crossfire, Republican Congressman William Dannemeyer of California. And in San Francisco, Dr. Mervyn Silverman, president of the American Foundation for AIDS Research.
Good evening. Welcome to Crossfire.
That we have a national public health emergency now.
That was Admiral James D. Watkins, chairman of the President's Commission on AIDS, and he made several recommendations. Here are some of them. That the President should immediately declare a national public health emergency. That Congress ban discrimination against AIDS victims and carriers in jobs, schools, and choice of housing. That $3 billion should be spent in fighting the disease. That every American child from kindergarten through 12th grade should learn about the disease, and that Congress should make it a crime knowingly to transmit it. What the Commission recommended was a direct criticism of the way the Reagan administration has so far handled the epidemic, and conservatives are likely to come out fighting. Pat?
Dr. Silverman, currently the civil rights laws do not apply to drug addicts. They do not apply to homosexuals. Isn't it a little ridiculous to think Congress is going to write a law saying it applies to drug addicts and homosexuals once they catch AIDS? That's what Admiral Watkins recommends.
Well, he's recommending that they not be discriminated because of their carrying the virus, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I think the issue is, do we want to try and do something about this disease, or do we want to carry on some social conflict that seems to continue endlessly in this country? The point is, if we want...
I have a question for you.
I think the point is, if I can just finish,
sure.
If we want to do something about this disease, we have to make people feel comfortable about coming forth with the fact that they're infected, or to be tested to find out if they're infected, and of course counseled. Anything else is going to keep that away and be detrimental to us doing something about this disease.
Dr. Silverman, look. The discrimination that AIDS victims undergo is not out of simple bigotry, I don't think, the way it is against blacks. It is very much out of fear. A mother that takes her kid out of class because the teacher has AIDS is terrified. Maybe you can say that's not reasonable to be frightened, but she is terrified. Now, what kind of civil rights law is going to affect that behavior, and what kind of punishment would you impose on the parents who took their kids out of school?
Well, it's not so much taking the kids out of school, it's not allowing the child to come to school. And I think if we are going to allow in this country people to be kept away from jobs, to be kept away from insurance, to be kept away from their homes because someone is fearful of something which every expert in the nation and the world has said is not necessary to be fearful of, I think we have a terrible situation.
Okay, Congressman Dannemeyer, you've done more talking about AIDS than any single member of Congress, so I'm going to let you have a chance now. Again. Now, wait a minute. I just want to ask this question. The report says that the key to the whole thing, the whole fight against AIDS, is to get people to come forward and be tested, and that they won't come forward and be tested if they fear for their jobs, or fear that they might lose their apartments, or fear they might be kicked out of school. Therefore, the anti-discrimination thing is important. What's your comment?
I think that's a red herring, and the reason is that we have an emergency on our hands. I accept that as what Admiral Watkins said. We have an emergency because our public health officials in America have not been pursuing routine steps that historically have been pursued to control any communicable disease that come down the pike.
Such as?
The cornerstone of public health efforts to control communicable disease is reportability. And Admiral Watkins talks out of both sides of his mouth in his recommendation with respect to that issue. On the one hand, he says we should have reportability. On the other, he says the person who has the virus should have the option of having the doctor require that he have written permission before it can be reported. That's nonsense.
Well, they go even further. Look, what they recommend. If Braden comes to me and says, Pat, I hate to tell you this, but I've heard from the doctor down at the clinic that X has AIDS. Under Watkins' recommendation, Braden could go to prison for a year. Now, that seems to me, when you got your prisons filling up with, they're letting out murderers, rapists, burglars, they seem to me to put Braden in prison for violating the First Amendment's ridiculous.
Dr. Silverman, what about that?
Well, I think, what's surprising to me, the president appointed this commission, certainly not the most liberal commission in the world. These people interviewed hundreds of people, AIDS experts from around the nation, AIDS researchers. They came to a position that has been the position of public health, and yet we have Congressman Dannemeyer and Pat Buchanan saying that's not good public health. We ought to do it this other way.
This didn't come down from Mount Sinai. Answer my question, Dr. Silverman. Isn't it silly to send Braden to jail for a year if he tells me some conservative friend of mine has got AIDS?
Well, I think I would like to make it so Braden would be afraid to tell it for fear of a big fine or going to jail or what have you. The point is not to fill the...
Jack Anderson revealed the name of a friend of mine who did die, reportedly of AIDS, before he was dead, that he was out at NIH with AIDS. Now, presumably, Mr. Anderson could go to jail for a year for that. And it seems to me that is absurd. You're crossing the line of the First Amendment. It is unworkable, and nobody's going to follow it.
Listen, we have confidentiality laws right now where, as a physician who has this information, cannot release this information. We want to make it such, as we have in the state of California, that a person cannot give this information out, which would have a detrimental economic or social effect on these individuals. The whole purpose of this, I think we're losing sight of the purpose. The purpose is to bring people in.
Wait a minute.
The purpose of this is to bring people in, have them counseled, have them tested. We want to change behavior where people may not be even aware that they are infected and make sure that we don't spread the disease.
All right.
The way to do that is to make it comfortable to do that.
I accept the concept of the necessity of confidentiality to protect the identity of any person with a communicable disease. But the fact of the matter is that 30 to 44% of the people with the virus, asymptomatic, have dementia. These people are manifesting the deterioration of the brain, which results in some instances of motor dysfunction of the individual. Are we to say to the workers of America that they're going to have to work side by side with such a person of that type? Also, in a recent study out of New York City, a small portion of the persons with the virus, asymptomatic, are manifesting infectious tuberculosis.
You talk about red herring. You talk about red herrings. That's a red herring. Obviously, anybody working next to you,
but Dr.
anybody working...
Anybody working next to you. You talk about education. Everybody knows how this disease is spread. Two primary sources. The first one is promiscuous male sodomy, and the second one is dirty needles. Now, look, why don't we go at it this way? I didn't see a word in there about closing down all bathhouses, porn theaters, gay bars, where this kind of promiscuous sodomy is commonplace, and everybody in the police force knows which ones they are. Why don't they go at it that way? I mean, you seem to be protecting an individual's right to privacy, I mean, even when he's a tremendous risk to the community.
Well, wait a minute. This is a disease of consenting adults, and if we're not careful, consenting youth. What we have to do, and all this other stuff really distracts us from the real point, is to educate everyone. If I don't place myself at risk with someone who's infected, I don't have to worry about it. As you said, and you were a little skewed, I'm afraid. I mean, anybody who engages in unprotected sex with an infected partner, male or female, is at risk. Doesn't just have to be homosexual males. So I think we ought to get away from that. The virus doesn't determine that this is a gay man and this is a straight man. It's an indiscriminate virus. And so I think we have to look at it as that, and that anybody who engages in high-risk behavior is at risk. Now, the point that I'm saying here is that if anyone is working alongside of someone and has a mental disability, I think they can't work if their motor skills are going to harm or potentially harm someone else. That's not the issue. The issue is
we've got to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to raise the questions of why it is that kindergartners and first graders have to be taught about AIDS.
Welcome back to Crossfire. Our guests are Dr. Mervyn Silverman in San Francisco, a medical expert on the disease called AIDS, and Congressman William Dannemeyer, Republican of California. Congressman Dannemeyer, one more question on this business of confidentiality and of discrimination. You say you don't want people to have AIDS or be carrying AIDS and work with them.
That's right.
Now look, how are you going to get those people to come into the hospitals or the doctors and be tested so that they know what they've got?
Sure.
Unless you give them confidentiality and unless you promise not to discriminate against them.
there are 8 states in the Union that mandate reportability. They contain less than 10% of the cases. Colorado, to me, has developed probably the most intelligent system of dealing with this epidemic in America of all the states. And the experience they've had on mandatory reportability in confidence to public health and contact tracing, which is something we should be doing around this country, they've actually tested more people in the state of Colorado per 1,000 people than they have in my state of California, which has got one of the most absurd, ridiculous laws on the books of any state in the Union. In California, would you believe this, Tom? We make it if a doctor finds a patient with a curable, communicable venereal disease like syphilis or gonorrhea, is required to report that patient to public health. On the other hand, if the same doctor finds a patient with a non-curable communicable venereal disease,
why do they do that?
Like the virus for AIDS, if the doctor reports it, the doctor becomes a crime.
Why do they do that?
It's a result of a law was passed. It's a law that was passed, AB 403, in March of 1985 as a result of the influence of the
Well, that shows we
homosexual
need
law
a
in
national
Sacramento.
law, which is what the Commission recommends. What I'm asking you...
But you cut him off. What he was saying is because of the influence of the gay community is what Bill was going
exactly
to say.
Right.
Right.
And
That
the
law
point
was
is,
adopted as a
the
result.
point is that the gay community has no effect on public health policy. And I think that's nonsense. And also,
that
if
were
you
the
go
case
to
in this country,
if you
Dr.
go to
Silverman,
if you go to Colorado,
public health
you'll
officials
find,
have been intimidated from taking action to protect the public
that's
health.
poppycock.
Look, all I
No,
want
that
to do...
isn't. That's
wait a minute.
nonsense.
I just want Congressman Dannemeyer to tell me, how are you going to get the people who have AIDS, the carriers of AIDS, to come in and be tested if you don't promise that you won't discriminate against them, if they won't, so they won't lose their jobs or be thrown out of their apartments?
Tom, if anyone who has the virus come into their system is eventually going to have a deterioration of the immune system, and they're going to necessarily they're going to seek medical treatment. They really have no other choice. They're going to come into contact with the public health or the private health care system when they're ill and manifesting symptoms, and at that point we treat them no better, no worse than any other
Dr.
citizen.
Silverman,
So that people can go through life without getting ill and still carry the disease.
Well,
Listen, Tom,
the point is, I think that's very bad medicine, very bad public health. What we want to try and do is encourage people to be counseled and tested, because it looks like there's a drug now, AZT, and possibly other drugs, which may be helpful to people closer to the point of infection rather than waiting until they're at death's door.
Dr. Silverman, let me ask you a question. Despite what you said earlier, this disease is still, among heterosexuals, it's still at 4%, and that includes Haitians and immigrants and others. If you get down to a certain group, you get it down to 2%. It is still almost exclusively a disease of male homosexuals and IV drug users. Why, therefore, does Admiral Watkins want us to take the little girls in kindergarten and first grade and teach them about AIDS? It seems to me that's an ideological position. It's got nothing to do with dealing with the disease here and now.
Well, I think what Admiral Watkins is saying is not to be talking about condoms and spermicides in kindergarten. But I think kindergartners see television and may not read the paper, but they hear a lot of discussion and need to have some understanding of the disease. I think at the age, wait, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you. Wait a minute. At the age in the community when kids are going to be sexually active, and each community knows this, I think we have to educate people, because we do know that it does spread male to female, female to male. Now, the reason we've seen so much in gay men first is because it entered that population and was silent in that population for 5 to 7 years before we saw the first case.
But Dr. Silverman, there's been no breakout for the reason that obviously the heterosexual intercourse is not the same problem that the homosexual intercourse
it's not as easy, but the point is you're talking about the same percentage over the last couple of years of a larger absolute number. So the numbers are growing. The percentages aren't changing, but the numbers are growing. And why should we wait for those numbers? Why not prevent what is eminently one of the most preventable
Dr. Silverman,
diseases?
on the word of prevention, may I ask why you failed to shut the bathhouses in San Francisco as a public health officer for 7 years during the time you were there? Why didn't you shut them down?
Well, I think if you read, you'll find that I did shut them down, Bill.
Only under great protest in September of 1984, and you resigned 2 months later when you declined to serve under the jurisdiction of the chief political officer of San Francisco County, Dianne Feinstein. The political leadership of San Francisco literally begged you to shut down the bathhouses, and you absolutely stonewalled, refused to do it.
Bill, are you asking a question or giving a speech?
Because you're treating this as a civil rights issue, not a public health issue. That's your bias.
Well, my bias is that it's a public health issue, and it happens to be... Bill, are you going to listen? Bill, you asked a question. Can I answer it? The point is it is a public health issue. And at this point, public health and civil liberties and civil rights are consonant. If it were a disease spread like smallpox, we'd have taken the most draconian moves. I would have closed more than bathhouses. I would have shut down people's homes. Now, wait a minute. Let me finish. Since it's a public health issue, since we're talking about a behavioral problem, the important thing was to change behavior across the community. The effectiveness of that changing behavior is evidenced in the statistics in San Francisco, which show that last year, wait a minute, that show that last year almost no virus was transmitted in the city and county of San Francisco last year. That comes
we'll
from
be back in a
behavior.
minute, Dr. Silverman. We'll take a break right here. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back. We're talking about the Watkins report. Congressman Dannemeyer, since this is largely confined to the homosexual community and the IV drug user community, and of course hemophiliacs and a few others, why is it a public health crisis when you've got, what have we got, 35,000 maybe dead in 5 years? From cancer in those 5 years, you probably got 4 million dead. Heart disease, you got 5 million dead. Admittedly, it's taking a number of lives, 1,000 a month or something like that, but it is small compared to the other big diseases.
It's a public health crisis in America, Pat, because our public health officials, tragically, from Dr. Koop on down to others around America, have not pursued traditional remedies that we have pursued to control any communicable disease.
What traditional remedies are you talking about?
Reportability is the whole cornerstone of public health.
Do you want to hang a poster on saying, warning, the occupants of this household have AIDS?
Let me tell you about this issue you touched on earlier.
I want to know what you mean.
We have reported to public health officials the 60,000 plus cases of fully developed AIDS, and in confidence, as it should be, and the system of confidentiality has protected the identity of these people. Ergo, if we report those who have the virus, the existing system of confidentiality will protect them just as well.
That's absolutely false, because it hasn't protected them. There's a lot of people who suffer discrimination.
Name me one public health official that has unauthorized
I'm not talking about public health officials.
The identity of some person who has fully developed AIDS and was reported to public health.
I am not talking about public health officials. It's other people doing. Well,
I want to report to public health no better, no worse than any other communicable disease.
Yeah, but that's not why this disease has moved to where it is. And I think it's very strange to hear someone say, since it's just in gays and just in IV drug users, why should we worry about it?
Well, let me bring up the last point that the Watkins Commission recommends, and we haven't even mentioned it, that Congress should pass a law making it a crime knowingly to transmit this disease. What's your view on that, Dr.
I think he's absolutely right. Anyone who wantonly transmits this disease, in other words, goes out of their way, you have to go out of your way to do it, to transmit this disease, cannot be allowed to do that any more than anyone could walk down the street waving a gun, shooting it randomly.
Dr. Silverman, you'll be pleased to hear we put such a provision into a markup vehicle last week in the Health and Environment Subcommittee where I served. It's a result of an amendment that I offered to the bill.
Dr. Silverman, that makes a great deal of sense, I think, to everybody here. And the point I think we're trying to get at is you seem tremendously concerned about the right of privacy of individuals, and rightly so, but someone who is carrying the AIDS virus and who's sexually active is a potential killer. And it seems to me when you weigh his right to a certain measure of privacy and the public's right to protection in this case, the public's right to protection really takes precedence.
But wait a minute, but you're still missing the point. I think the point is that this is not a disease that is casually spread. I have to go out of my way either through sex or through drugs to get it. What we have to do is educate everybody, and we want to get those people who are infected in and treated.
Educate. Everybody knows how it's caught.
That's why a third
about the opportunistic diseases that are sometimes found in persons with a virus or AIDS, which themselves are communicable in some instances with the respiratory system.
Why is it that the Commission, they spend a lot of time on this, why do they recommend that people go in and get tested, and that the only way you can get them to go in and get tested is to take away the fear?
Tom, this is not a Commission report. This is one of the 13 reporting to us today, Admiral Watkins. Right. On June 24, the Commission will make its report to the country, and
Why did Watkins jump the gun?
That's an interesting question. I suspect he has other motives for doing it today rather than 3 weeks from now.
You think the Commission will contradict Watkins and he wanted to get his stuff, get the publicity?
I think there are other members of the Commission who are going to have a different approach to what recommendation should be made to the President of the country as to how we should be dealing with treating with the AIDS epidemic.
Which will be antithetical to good public health practice.
Well, how do you know what they're going to say, Merv?
If they go opposite, if they go counter to what Watkins says, then I think it will be. And listen, Watkins, I have been impressed with the gentleman. He's listened and he's heard from hundreds of people, and I think to throw that aside...
Dr. Silverman,
my
thank you
public
very
health
much.
approach.
Thank you very much, Congressman Dannemeyer. Good to see you again back here. Tom and I will be back in a minute to talk about the Watkins report.
About the disease. The homosexual community is conscious. The bathhouses are generally closing. The drug people who shoot drugs,
they're killing
they
themselves.
know it. They know it.
Right.
But what I want to know is, what good will it do to put a quarantine on their houses and say, look, this gentleman inside here has AIDS?
No, look, I'm not recommending a quarantine. All I'm saying is everything, just about everything that Admiral's saying, and I like him, is unrealistic. You don't need to educate little kindergartners about this, Tom.
Well, you ought to tell them about it.
But look,
no, I don't mean a
how can you
kindergarten,
say-
but 5th grade, 6th grade, they ought to know about it.
Well, look, well, they can read about it in the papers. Look, Tom, the civil rights laws don't apply to homosexuals. They don't apply to addicts. And we're going to say, however, they do apply once you catch AIDS.
But how
That's
are
absurd.
Otherwise, how are you going to get them in, get tested, and know what the facts are?
Well, Tom, what you don't do is if somebody leaks it out, you're going to put him in prison for a year? This is absurd.
From the left, I'm Tom Braden.
And you know it.
Good night for Crossfire.
All right, Pat Buchanan, join us tomorrow night for another edition of Crossfire.
If you would like to comment on tonight's program, write to CNN Crossfire, Post Office Box 2067, Washington, D.C. 20013-2067.